Spread wider, I'm not stopping until my seed takes root. The lonely 70-year-old rancher told the 70-year-old rancher stood at the edge of his land before the sun had fully lifted itself. Over the low hills, the sky still bruised purple and gray, the air sharp with the scent of damp soil. His boots pressed into the earth, leaving prints that filled slowly with moisture, as if the ground itself were breathing. He had woken before the birds, as he always did, but this morning felt heavier, weighted by memories that crept in during the quiet hours. The ranch house behind him was dark, its windows like closed eyes, holding decades of laughter, arguments, silence, and loss. He didn't turn back. He faced the fields. He had spoken the words the night before alone, almost embarrassed by the sound of his own voice carried by the wind. Spread wider. I'm not stopping until my seed takes root. There had been no one to hear him except the land, and that was exactly why he'd said it. For years now, he had talked to the soil more than to people. The land listened without judgment. It took what he gave and responded honestly, never pretending, never lying. The field stretched out in front of him, uneven patches where past seasons had struggled. Drought had cracked parts of it, like old scars that refused to fade. He had lost cattle here once. During a summer so dry the grass turned brittle underfoot. He had buried a dog near the fence line, and farther out beneath an oak that no longer stood, he had scattered the ashes of his wife after the funeral crowd had gone home. The land remembered everything, even if it never spoke. He tightened his grip on the plow handles, feeling the familiar roughness of the wood, polished smooth by years of work and sweat. His hands were spotted now, veins raised like cords, knuckles thick with arthritis, but they still knew what to do. Muscle memory carried him forward when motivation faltered. He leaned into the first pass, the blade biting into the soil with a low, steady resistance that traveled up through his arms and into his chest. The sound grounded him. Earth being opened had a language of its own. As the furrow formed, dark and clean, he felt a small surge of relief. This at least still worked. He walked slowly, letting the plow do its job, trusting the weight and the angle. The field responded by yielding, rolling over itself in long, patient lines. He imagined the roots that would one day claim this space, pushing down, spreading out, finding water where none seemed to exist. He had always believed roots were smarter than people. They didn't rush. They adapted. He paused at the end of the row to catch his breath, resting his forearms on the plow. The morning light had grown warmer now, revealing dust on his sleeves and the faint tremble in his hands. He thought about stopping, about how easy it would be to justify rest at his age. 70 sounded heavy when spoken aloud. People said it to him like a warning, like a closing door. But the land didn't care how many birthdays he'd had. It only cared whether he showed up. He reached into the worn canvas bag slung over his shoulder and pulled out a handful of seed. He had saved it himself from a better year, when rain came at the right time and the harvest had surprised everyone. Those seeds were smaller now, dry and unremarkable to the eye, but he knew what they carried. He knelt, knees protesting, and let the grain slip through his fingers into the open furrow. The act felt intimate, almost sacred. Giving something up in hope of return always did. As he covered the seed with soil, he whispered again, quieter this time, as if the land were close enough to hear without raising his voice. He wasn't commanding it. He was asking the ground to open, to accept, to try once more, asking himself to believe that effort still meant something, even when no one was watching. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of sage from the far side of the property. A fence creaked somewhere, loose wires singing softly. He straightened slowly and looked across the field, imagining it not as it was now, but as it could be. Rose-filled, green-rising movement where there had been emptiness. He imagined walking through it later in the season, brushing his hand against the tops, feeling life respond. The thought tightened his throat. He took another step, then another, guiding the plow into the next row. Each pass felt like a conversation, question and answer, effort and response. Loneliness still sat with him, a familiar companion, but it loosened its grip as he worked. Out here, he wasn't a widower, wasn't an old man people spoke to slowly. He was a rancher doing what ranchers had always done, preparing the ground and trusting the rest to time. The sun finally cleared the hills, bathing the field in gold. He stopped again, sweat cooling on his neck, and allowed himself a small smile. The land was open now, ready. And so he realized was he. Weeks passed in a rhythm that felt both ancient and newly discovered. The rancher returned to the fields each morning, sometimes before sunrise, sometimes under a sky already bright with promise, and each time he noticed the subtle changes that only patience reveals. At first it was nothing more than a suggestion of green, so faint he wondered if his eyes were playing tricks on him. Then the shoots grew bolder, standing upright as if testing their own strength. He knelt beside them, careful not to disturb the fragile stems, and felt a quiet satisfaction settle into his bones. The land had answered. He adjusted his routines to the growing season, mending fences he'd long neglected, clearing stones from irrigation channels, checking the old pump with renewed attention. These tasks, once burdensome, now felt purposeful again. He talked to the plants as he worked, not because he believed they needed encouragement, but because the sound of his own voice reminded him he was still part of the world's conversation. The loneliness didn't vanish, but it softened, reshaped by the presence of something growing because of his care. One afternoon, as he rested on the tailgate of his truck, a neighbor slowed along the dirt road and stopped. They hadn't spoken much over the years. Distance and pride had built quiet walls, but the sight of green had drawn curiosity. They exchanged a few words about the weather, about how rare it was to see the fields look so hopeful this early. The neighbor offered a thermos of coffee, and the rancher accepted. They stood together in companionable silence, watching the breeze ripple through the young plants like a living tide. Word traveled faster than he expected. Another neighbor came by with spare parts for the pump, insisting they might be useful. A couple from down the road dropped off a basket of bread and fruit, saying it was good to see life returning to the place. Each visit surprised him. He realized how long he'd been invisible, not out of neglect, but because he'd stopped signaling. He was still open to connection. The fields had done that for him, announcing his presence with color and persistence. As the season deepened, the ranch house no longer felt like a museum of memories. He opened windows that had stayed shut for years, letting air and dust and sunlight move freely through the rooms. He ate meals on the porch again, sometimes alone, sometimes with visitors who stayed longer than planned. Stories were exchanged about failed crops, about children grown and gone, about the strange comfort of routine. He listened more than he spoke, discovering that listening itself was a kind of planting, a way of making room. The land demanded his attention daily. There were setbacks, an unexpected heat wave, a line clogged with debris, a night when pests tested the limits of his resolve. Each challenge stirred old doubts, whispers that told him this effort was foolish at his age. Yet every morning he returned to the rows, checking leaves, adjusting water, trusting that care compounded over time. He had learned, late perhaps, but clearly, that stopping was the only true failure. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the fields amber, he walked slowly between the rows. The plants were taller now, sturdier, their roots well established beneath the surface. He pressed his palm to the soil, feeling warmth linger from the day. Beneath his hand, unseen, a network had formed, roots entwined, drawing strength from shared space. The thought struck him with unexpected force. He had done the same in his own way, allowing himself back into the weave of community. He remembered his wife then, not with the sharp ache that used to accompany her memory, but with a gentler gratitude. She had believed in cycles and seasons that returned even after harsh winters. He imagined her approving nod, the way she used to survey the fields with hands on her hips. He spoke her name aloud, letting it rest in the open air, and felt no fear that it would disappear. Some things, once planted, stayed. Harvest approached with a sense of inevitability rather than urgency. He didn't rush it. Neighbors offered help, and this time he accepted without hesitation. They worked together, laughing at mistakes, sharing meals under the wide sky. The fields yielded generously, not extravagantly, but enough. Enough to justify the effort, enough to share, enough to leave something behind. On the final evening, after the tools were cleaned and stored, the rancher sat alone at the edge of the field. The land looked different now, trimmed, satisfied, resting after its labor. He felt a similar calm settle within himself. His legacy, he realized, wasn't just the crop or the property. It was the willingness to keep opening ground, to keep believing that what you give with care will find a way to take root. As darkness gathered and stars emerged one by one, he stood and turned toward the house, light glowing warmly through the windows. Tomorrow there would be plans to make, seeds to save, conversations to continue. For the first time in years, the future felt less like an empty stretch and more like a field waiting patiently for the next season.